In the early 60s. Anyway, welcome back to Fusion Latina right here at 88.9 FM and WDNA.org. And my guest in the studio this evening is Mr. Bobby Marin, a longtime Latin music producer, songwriter, choreographer.
Whatever, yeah. Choreographer. It's a pleasure to be here, Andy, as usual.
And we're here to celebrate the music of
Mr.
Joe
Cuba.
Mr. late great Joe Cuba, and you compiled this compilation, so
Yes, I
produced
did.
it. It's called Joe Cuba, El Alcalde Del Barrio. Those of you who don't speak Spanish, the mayor of the ghetto.
There you go.
The mayor.
That's what he was, you know.
Right.
He loved his barrio.
That's true. Even till he lived and died there. He never moved.
He still lives there. How's that?
Yeah, that's right. But anyway, his recording career spanned 4 decades. 50,
Incredible.
60, 70, 5 decades.
I mean, there's 35 songs in that album, I believe, and I had to select from...
34, yeah.
That's what I said, 34. And I had to select from 250 songs, you know. So
It's hard, tough.
And they were all good, you know. All of the recordings are good. So it was. He actually was working with me on the project. That's how far back we go. Unfortunately, he passed away last February, but prior to that, you know, I was seeking his input, you know, because I wanted him to have his music, his favorite titles included. So he sent me a list, and we worked from that.
We're sort of going backwards, but that's okay. Right before Joe died, he had some medical problems. He was in a wheelchair. He had trouble walking. His hip replacement.
I know. The poor guy. He kept telling me, Bobby, the clock is ticking, man. We got to get this thing out. We got to get this done.
But anyway,
unfortunately, never got to.
Joe was born in Spanish Harlem in New York City. I don't know exactly when, but his real name was Gilberto Calderon.
Actually, his real name was Navarro. But his father abandoned him when him and his brother when they were children, and his mother remarried, and he took his
stepfather's name.
Right.
And then he something about he lived with an Italian family, and that's how he got the name Sonny. His nickname Sonny. And I remember everybody calling him Sonny.
Sonny, yeah, that's right. She called him Sonny because he was so bright. I mean, that's the story. I mean, that's what she.
And for those of you who don't know, Joe was a percussionist. He played congas and other percussion instruments. And I read some of the liner notes. He started out playing with another band with Joe Panama.
That's right.
Who was a piano player, and then something happened, and the band
They had a falling out.
They had a falling out, and Joe Cuba went and back, to the places where they were working and said, "Well, I got my own band now. And what's your name?" And one guy gave him the name. Well, we had Joe Panama, now we'll have Joe Cuba.
Exactly. That's where Joe Cuba came from.
Right.
Yeah. Even though he's Puerto Rican, but,
right.
A lot of people think he's Cuban.
Well, that was sort of like Cuban Pete had almost the same story.
Yeah.
That they called him Cuban Pete because
he danced Cuban music.
Because he said Puerto Rican Pete didn't fit on the marquee.
Exactly.
Or something.
Yeah, it's hard to go around as a band leader called Joe Puerto Rico.
Right, Joe Puerto Rico. Well, anyway, Joe Cuba's sextet, the original sextet was a very young Cheo Feliciano, even before Cheo Feliciano. Willie Torres, Jimmy Sabater was there from the beginning on timbales.
Yes.
And
they were actually Jimmy and Nicky, the piano player.
They were in the Joe Panama group.
They were the Joe Panama group, right?
Right. And so they split off and
they formed the new band, and that's when Willie Torres came into the picture. But then Willie left to
pursue a career in public service.
He became
a bus driver.
Ralph Grambo.
But actually,
who's laughing now?
Yeah.
But Willie still participated in the recordings and wrote tunes for Joe, and they were always tight. And whenever Joe was stuck, Willie came back to cover when the other guys couldn't make the gig. And
oh yeah, Willie's a bit when Willie came back to the band and took over for Cheo. They didn't miss a beat. I mean, Willie stepped right in there and took care of business. They had plenty of hits after Cherry left the band. You know, Willie's a very inventive musician, and on my other independent productions, I always tried to use Jimmy Sabater and Willie Torres on the quarter, because not only were they talented and interesting and fun to work with, but they were inventive. They come up with ideas. And
on this CD, there's some rare tracks with Joe Cuba with trumpets as well.
In his early days, when he first signed with Mardi Gras Records, he had trumpets. Yeah, he used trumpets.
And those of you who were not familiar with what was going on in New York in the early 50s, most of the Latin bands made their living not playing for Latinos, but playing for Americans. They worked in the American hotels and the resorts of the Catskills and in New Jersey and at the Palladium, except for the Palladium.
Sonny probably had a better following in the Catskills than
And Joe was one of the first guys to do salsa or Latin music in English, mambo in English.
That's right. That's
mambo of the times.
He had such a great following of Jewish, especially Jewish and Italian fans, primarily because he worked up in the Catskills a lot. But he made sure that he had plenty of music that they could relate to. So he had the English.
Yeah, and then later on, 10 or 15 years later, that became a big thing. But
yeah, he was one of the innovators.
The innovators. Yeah.
And they always were melodic. You know, his music was you listen to all of his tunes, and it always had a nice melody to it. And another thing about them is they're a fine bunch of singers. I mean, you listen to some of the boleros that he does, and their harmony is like.
Well, because Jimmy Sabater came right out of doo-wop.
Right.
You know, he was a doo-wop
singer. It was also a product of where he lived and where we lived, because New York, I mean, first of all, where I lived in the Bronx, there was Jews on this side of the corner, and then the Italians here, and the Irish guys in the middle, and the Puerto Ricans, and, you know, and all of those influences.
Exactly.
You can tell that Jimmy Sabater listened to the Drifters and
absolutely.
and the Platters and the Ink Spots.
I was in a doo-wop group myself called the Del Chords on 107th Street, and we sang. We did the Apollo Theater.
I was in the Deli Chords.
Yeah.
That's on Church Avenue in Brooklyn, in front of Max's
and Delancey Street. You used to sing under the lamppost.
Hey, that happened a lot in New York in those days.
Yeah, but that influence is definitely there. Johnny Colon is another one that used to sing doo-wop. There's a few of us that, except they sang it on key, not like me, you know.
And Joe Bataan.
Of course.
Joe Bataan, yeah. Well, he was more like the Latin soul type guy. He wasn't more a doo-wop type guy.
But he
derived from that.
Yeah, you listen.
But Joe was pretty ahead of his time and all this. The other thing also was, you got to remember, when you're working with a sextet with no horns, just a vibe player, you know what I mean, no bongo player, just timbales and congas, you have to, you know, the vocals are very important because they took the place of the horns and the breaks, and it had to be swinging. Otherwise, it would get kind of boring. You know?
Exactly.
Milt Jackson was one of the people that influenced him and Lionel, because Joe Cuba, where he lived in Harlem, not too far away, he could go see them at 110th Street, where they played all the time. So he was into Lionel Hampton and
you know, there were guys doing Latin music on vibes before that, but like Tito Puente, and even Tito Rodriguez played vibes, and Cal Jada, George Shearing, but it wasn't. They did use the vibes more for like Latin jazz type tunes, mambo.
Joe Cuba uses them as percussive instruments.
Well, the vibes replaced the violins on a lot of tunes. They took charanga type tunes and converted them to vibe tunes.
Plus, they were very exciting when they performed too.
They all danced and sang.
They had energy,
clapped their hands and jumping around.